Give me just a minute here. And skadoosh. Hello everyone. And welcome once again. And as usual, since you're most likely watching this after the fact, don't forget, like, subscribe, bell icon, the usual blah blah blah. Got that out of the way. And you keep it photon rocking. I mean, we're talking seriously rocking. And so anyway, let me check something here. Logitech settings. Okay, good. Alright, so anyway. Apparently I am the only one watching. And that's kind of weird. I must confess, I am not certain tonight's patron will show up. I messaged him a few hours ago and a few minutes ago. Never got a reply, neither message. So, yeah. If I do not get my patron in, we're going to be keeping an eye on the number of viewers. If we don't have anyone watch, if no one shows up and at least says hi in the chat by about 8:30, I'm probably just going to start doing rambly weirdnesses. Maybe talk about comparative game design, I don't know. Meanwhile, let me go ahead and so yeah. Once again, I am waiting on my patron. Now I'm going to go ahead and let loose another little bit of plan about my current project, the legendary enemies. Legendary might be changed, some kind of, or epic enemies, or something like that. I've been working on a list of these foes, and currently that list includes the Frost Chimera, which, the idea is that it's larger and more cunning than the average Chimera, and it's frost-based. Doomworm. The Doomworm is, what happens when you take a purple worm, take the soul of an insane serial killer, make it blind and deaf, and stuff it into the animated body of that undead purple worm. Yeah. Or you could just use it as a purple worm. You know. Yes, Carlton. Go figure. The Great Feldrake is a corrupted dragon breeding experiment. The best way to think of it is it's like a wingless saurian dragon. It's wingless and kind of almost like a theropod dinosaur, but with spikes and horns and stuff like that. The Sea Drake, the hybrid of sea serpent and dragon turtle. Storm Wyvern. Storm Wyvern I finished earlier today. Take a wyvern. They're normally size large. Make it size huge. Make them very, very old. And we learn through him that when they get old enough, wyverns become fully sapient, like true dragons. And in his case, he's got electrical power. Not actual breath. It's more like an electric eel shocking. But he's also often mistaken for a full dragon, which pisses him off. And then you've got the more humanoid opponents, like Rumad Skull Eater, an orc warlord, or Moalin Bonebinder, the necromancer / lich. There'll be two forms. One will be him as a necromancer, and one will be him as a lich. Oh, there's also a dragon. Yes, I'm making a dragon. A blue dragon. Known as Vokul Tarovin. He's a cunning one. And he's a mob boss. He's got two primary servants. One is his majordomo, who is, of course, handles all of his various affairs and all that, and is his number one servant. And then you've got his left hand, the one who actually is, presenting himself as being in control of this organized crime syndicate. Ah, I see. I have at least one watcher. Welcome. And like I said, I am currently waiting on my patron to show up. Yay. And don't forget, go ahead and feel free to say whatever you want to say in the chat. Because, yeah. Anyway, that's just a few of the epic enemies that I've got working on. Hello, Michael. Very well then. Do we have... while we're waiting on our patron, go ahead and ask questions. Let me know. Feed me with these questions. Let me answer what I can. Because I'll be honest, I'm not certain this guy's going to show. No response to messaging on the Patreon. So, yeah. I know you said you had a boatload of questions, and I guess this will become question and answer. And I will say this, while the answer is usually 42, I will try to give a more accurate answer. For an utter 3D sculpting noob? I'll be honest, the only program I've learned the sculpting on is ZBrush. But, as a complete... unless you've got a business reason, ZBrush is a bit much for just learning on. I'd actually recommend Sculptress. Sculptress started out as a third-party program, and they got bought out by ZBrush, by Pixelogic is the company. So Sculptress is currently made by Pixelogic. I would recommend that, if only for the reason that it is free, and it is a dedicated sculpting program. You don't have to learn 1,500 different things like you would with Blender. So, for right now, until I find out, that there's another valid, beginner tier program, I would say that Sculptress is probably the best bet. Next question. Or do we have another question? Or are you just typing? You're probably just typing. Hold on just a second. There we go. Now, the thing about sculpting is... Oh, okay. How long was it before I started to not suck? Let me put it to you this way. I've shown comparison pictures of the first miniature that I released on Thingiverse and my current ones. That took about a year and a half. But I've been sculpting on ZBrush since about 2007. The thing about a lot of these sculpting programs is that the user interface is usually quite different from what most people are used to seeing. So, what would be the common method of 3D modeling? Let's say the either the Blender or the 3D Studio Max, four window, top, top, front, left, perspective, tools down the sides, and menus across the top, doesn't apply. What this means is that there are two learning curves, especially for ZBrush. Most people, that learning curve goes not it's other people it's or you start off there. It felt instinctive to me. Partly because I've actually sculpted before using tools that felt similar to the stylus from my tablet. And so it felt like sculpting in putty, like I was used to. It just had a Control C. I just gotta make sure not to link Control Z to the button on the side. I don't use the button on the side of the stylus for some reason. Yes, instead of a learning curve, ZBrush has a learning cliff. But some people start at the top of the cliff. Once you get the basics down on ZBrush, it's all just, the strokes, the techniques are similar, it's just what the tools do is different. So it's just a matter of just, once you've gotten the basics down, it's just a matter of learning the tools. Learning the brushes, as they're called. The alternate terminology is part of what gives a lot of people pause. Instead of the mesh or model, it's the tool. Instead of the tool, it's a brush. The reason for this is ZBrush did not start out 3D. It started out with called 2.5D. That meant it was intended originally in its beta version as creating 2D imagery using 3D brushes. And they added in tools to convert a 3D mesh into a tool to use on your canvas, and in the process they ended up using it in being able to modify that mesh, and then people realized, wait a minute, we can just directly edit the 3D model and forget the 2.5D painting. But the core 2.5D painting is still there in the programming. And it's also there in the terminology used by the program. A lot of other 3D sculpting programs will often use the ZBrush terminology just to ride the wave. At the time it came out, it had one primary rival. And That was Mudbox, which is also made by the same company that makes 3D Studio Max, Autodesk. Mudbox did not feel as intuitive to me, which is why I stuck with ZBrush, which turned out to be a major plus because, number one, Mudbox has not had that unofficially perpetual license that ZBrush has had ever since I got it. Number two, ZBrush has turned into a market-dominating force for sculpting apps. So I sided with the right side. No Betamax here. Oh wait, most of you are too young for that. No HD DVD here. I went with Blu-ray. There you go. Oh wait. Some of you are actually too young for that. Go figure. The thing about using ZBrush or any other program, always sculpt. Sculpt at least something every day. Whether it's a full figure or two like I did today, 2.5 if you count the fact that I chopped up the wyvern, or if it's just testing out some tools that you've never used before, some brushes you've never used before. You're not young enough to not know about Betamax, okay? The thing that gets me about Betamax, it was the better format. To the point where a lot of television studios used Betamax internally before converting to VHS. It's just that VHS was cheaper. Yeah. Anyway, now HD DVD versus Blu-ray is a bit more of a complex factor. It's not as cut and dried as Betamax VHS. One is better, one is cheaper. No, it's HD held more data, but Blu-ray was faster. So if it was just for the sake of home movies, HD DVD might have made it. But because it's also data, and speed is king for data, Blu-ray got it. Also, the reason why VHS, DVD, and Blu-ray all got adopted, the first industry to adopt all three was the porn industry. Go figure. Anyway, going back to VHS, in the early 2000s, 3D Studio Max and Maya were the two big rival programs for 3D at an industrial level, you might say, when it comes to things like making video games. Most CG in movies was done using things like Houdini and proprietary programs, in-house only. And then Maya got bought out by Autodesk, and they kept it as a separate program because the core programming code for Max and Maya are slightly better at some things. Plus, I'm used to the 3D Studio Max user interface, layout, setup, menu arrangement, the whole 9 yards. If they changed it on me to be nothing but Maya, I'd be SOL for at least a month and a half, 2 months, learning the new UI. Whereas by keeping them as two separate programs, they've got, they can focus one on one market and one on another, which they kind of have. But in general, when you learn a given skill set, like when you understand how polygons how you construct the polygons, like when I make my props, for an edge, I make sure to have, a sharp edge. I make sure to have not just a polygon line down the sharp side, but one right real close to it, because when it's smooth, it stays sharp that way. I know one thing I'll do. I'll explain subdivision. Polygonal subdivision. How does that sound? That way I can explain why reinforcing an edge keeps it sharp. Okay? Alright. What I'm going to do is very simple. I'm just going to go ahead and pop to Photoshop. Alright. Now, I'm going to be drawing in 2D, but this is going to be just like what happens in 3D. Okay? So, let's go here. Alright. Now, let's assume that we have... Let me add a layer. Let's make it a little bit bigger. Just make it easier to see. Alright, so... Okay, there we have like a cross section, you might say. Now, let's make that 50%, just to make it dark, not quite so dark. If this is our geometry, when we mesh smooth, what happens is it goes from the edge halfway down the edge of that polygon, and then moves in a little bit, and then goes up to the halfway point of that polygon, pulls that vertex in a little bit, halfway up to this polygon, halfway here, 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 here. Now, you can see that it's become a lot smoother. It has also doubled the number of these polygons, which on a 3D object, that would be quadrupling. And it has rounded off all of those edges. Now, let's take this, let's pop it up again, open up another layer, and let's say that we added polygons here, or lines here and here, here and here, and left the rest. I'm going to go ahead and fit this a little bit tighter on the screen. It'll be easier to do. Okay, now what we do, I'm going to use some red for this, and I'm also going to drop the size. Now what we would do is we go from here to here to here to pull this in halfway in, pull it there, pull it there. Pull it in, go to halfway of that point here, and then we come back to halfway here, pull it in a bit, halfway here, pull it in a little bit, halfway here, and down. The end result is that those extra edges there sharpen there and there to resemble what they were in their lower res versions. Because when we went to go halfway, there was a much smaller curve. It was a straight line to follow that was evenly divided. The smaller curve here compared to the size of the curve here. Okay? That's a pretty big curve to follow. So instead of ending up like that, we ended up like this. And if we had done to these edges and this edge, it would have looked very similar to the original art here, just with a more slight curve on each of these corners. And then just refine even tighter and tighter. So, did that help explain why I put those little sharp edges near things I want to be sharp? Those extra edges you add on either side are called reinforcing edges. Any other basic 3D knowledge that you want to learn, like, I don't know, normals, Phong shading, anything like that? Ah. Okay. If you look at the oldest 3D polygonal renderings in cinema, which, to be absolutely honest, is the Solar Sailor sequence in the original Tron, you'll see that it looks faceted. Now, admittedly, they did that deliberately, but it's for the same reason why all of the other things in Tron look flat-faced. Because it's easier. Once again, we're going to go back to Photoshop. Okay? We're going to use that same curve. Now, I'm going to go ahead and shrink this a little. Move this. Nope. Move this down, down, and now let's add another layer for working. We're going to use the red for what we're about to say. Now, if we look at polygons arranged like that, it would look like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 flat faces sticking out, like you had shaved 5 flat faces. We don't want that when we look at a 3D object. We want it to look like a smooth curve. We just want to cheat and use not as many polygons as we could. Normals is the term for the direction a face or vertex points. The original form, each face. Whoop. No, that's not what I want. Each face pointed in the direction perpendicular to the face. Just like that. But when you calculated light bouncing off of it, it would bounce off perfectly perpendicular. No matter how close you were to up here, it was still perfectly perpendicular. And if light coming from here would come almost right back. So there would be a sharp change in the shading color there. Long shading is a method where instead of calculating by the facets, you calculate... Oh, stop that. You calculate by the vertexes, which average the direction of the faces. Now, if I shine a beam of light from here, that's going to hit here. If it was flat, it would bounce back that way. But it's not. Instead of the angle being this way, it's slightly more this way because it's closer to this angle. So it's going to bounce off slightly more that way. If I have another parallel beam of light hitting right here, it's going to bounce that way. Even though on the old model, it would have been the same shading, the same amount of light reflection. And then a nearly parallel light beam hits here, well, it's going to bounce that way. Or it's here, instead of bouncing, and then it's going to bounce that way. So this edge will be darker than this edge and this edge. Instead of having only 2 shades here, it'll have 3. And then we have that same parallel light hitting here. Well, it's closer to this parallel, so it's going to bounce out like this. Yet another shade. Okay. Now, under normal circumstances, pun intended, if this was a completely closed off solid, all of the normals would be pointing out. They'd all be pointing out from the center. You know, like this. However, it's entirely possible, instead, that the inside is the surface. Now, what does that matter? Well, most rendering engines can't deal with light that is passing through the back of the face. It'll act like it doesn't even exist. So, let's go ahead and make this green to make it a little bit more fun. So a beam of light hitting here, if the normals were pointing out, would bounce off like that. But if the normals are facing like they are in this drawing, it'll go right through, hit here, and bounce off like that. You'll see the inside. That's what happens sometimes when you're working on something and it looks inside out. The normals are pointing inside instead of outside. Did any of that make sense to you? Any of that good for you? Once you get the hang of it, it's like there's a little light switch goes bling, and it makes sense to you. Once you've got the basic knowledge and you think about it, maybe rewatch this part of the video, play around in a program like Blender or that. The way it applies to sculpting is because that shading, if you use, all right, that's basic general 3D knowledge. Sculpting, you're just working with a whole lot of itty bitty polygons really close together that aren't very angled, unless you do that rim, the edge technique. That's knowledge for general modeling, which you need to make your base geometry for props and things like that. Now, the way it applies to sculpting is, let's use ZBrush. ZBrush does not display the back side of the face. So if you have your normals pointing in, because of how you happen to make your surface, you can't sculpt on that side. You'll be sculpting on the inside. It's got tools to let you invert the normal, which is what it calls when you make it go from in here to pop out. But with most 3D apps, if your normals are inverted, you've got to fix that before you can sculpt on it or really even render it. If you tried to slice something, in most older slicers, newer ones can deal. In older slicers that had the normals pointing inward, it wouldn't know what to do. It would think slice everything except the volume of your figure. So, it's the same reason why older slicers don't like any holes at all in your figure. Newer slicers can tend to deal with it. Hold on just a second. Sorry about that. Newer slicers can deal with the figures having a hole or so. Assume that it automatically fill that gap. Some slicers don't like to do that. Older slicers don't like it at all. And it depends on the program you're using. Just a second. Yeah. Now, I'm sure. Yeah. Okay, now I am sure that you probably already gone back in and looked at my videos on proportion, posing, anatomy, things like that. Or have you? Not yet. Okay. The videos that I made on this channel about proportion and posing and anatomy are as they apply to sculpting for 3D printing tabletop miniatures. Let's just pull out the classic example of a 1990s era miniature. Where is it? Here he is. This is This is a word answer from Games Workshop from the early to mid 90s. Okay, one thing that you'll notice, I'm gonna break out my ultra crappy cheapo calipers. There they are. The head. Let's compensate a little bit for hair. Okay, that head is just over 2.5 millimeters. The total height, also compensating for the hair, is exactly 28 millimeters. Yes, this is 25 millimeter to the eye, but it's not 25 millimeter scale because his pose has bent legs and a wide stance, so he's dropping a good bit in that stance. But not 2.5, that's 6 millimeters, sorry. 6 millimeter head, 28 millimeter height. It'd probably be closer to 30 millimeter total height. So the head is 1/5 instead of 7.5, 1/8. That a human proportion. The hands are huge compared to the head. I mean, my hand, like that. His hands are like that. And of course, the feet. But Lord, the feet. The feet are 8 millimeters long. 8 millimeters. That's a third of the height. That would be, if my feet would be that long. His shoulders. If we measure shoulder to shoulder, 10 millimeters wide. 10 millimeters. That would be giving me shoulders this wide. Now, admittedly, this is an elf, and Warhammer elves always had longer faces and thinner faces than the usual human figures. Unlike D&D, they were the same height. Although the lore claimed they were taller, the figures came out the same height. But you know the reasons. I've said it before. It's number one, it's easier to paint something with features that large. Number two, it's more durable. If this sucker, if this is a metal figure, one of the white metal figures. If its ankles and feet were the size of a normal human's ankles and feet, scaled down perfectly, it could bend easy. I just tap this and it would start to bend. And with the later period white metals, they were more brittle. They wouldn't so much bend as break. You have to be very careful with them. I mean, you can see me bending that sword right near the middle. You have to be very careful and very slow bend. Anyway, that's why they started looking like that. As refinement techniques in plastic materials and plastic molding improved, they could get better. This is a more recent, I still have yet to finish painting this, Games Workshop figure from the Age of Sigmar canon. Now you'll notice this one, if we measure from this back foot, is 35 millimeters. Measure to the eye and it's a 32 millimeter. Yeah, well 31, but again she's not quite standing perfectly at attention. The head, compensating a little bit for the headdress, just a little bit, is also 6 millimeter. The head is still the same size as that one. The face is smaller, with a more pronounced dome, because the eyes are finally in the middle of the skull. On that one, they were up about here, or mine are about here. And the hands are a fraction of the size that they used to be, but still slightly larger than normal. These ankles are still not the size of an ankle for a slender human female of those otherwise similar proportions. And she's still broader and thicker than the average human female. They claim it's true scale. It's really not. It's still a little bit thicker, a little bit more exaggerated. But again, that's for, actual molded current plastics. And as you can see, it's got a little bit of flex to it. Old school plastics were either waxy and could not hold detail well, but were moderately durable, or were brittle as all get out. Now for posing, I say it almost every time. There are two primary laws to posing, and you can still break them if you need to, but it's a good habit to get into following both of them. The first is that draw an imaginary plane for where the hip is. Let me go ahead and I'm going to pull out a couple cards here I'm going to pull out my Kroger card, and I'm going to pull out my one. Alright, where did it go? Brum, brum, brum. I'm going to pull out this business card. Imagine a plane with the hips and a plane for bone to bone across the shoulders. Okay? Someone standing perfectly at attention. These two planes would be perfectly parallel to each other and perfectly parallel to the ground. Except not. In the real world, no one can do that perfectly. There'll be slight differences, as you can see here. To make a pose feel natural, they should not be parallel to each other in any plane. Slightly turned, slightly angled, slightly forward. And both of them slightly angled and slightly tilted compared to the ground. That makes the pose look more natural. Even if you've got them not parallel to the ground, if they're parallel to each other, you can't do that. It doesn't work that way. So by giving it a bit more flex in the torso, you're making it more natural. The second thing is movement or no movement. If you want your pose to have movement, it's got to look off balance. Whether it's balanced or not, it's got to look off balance. I mean, a perfect example of a miniature that I did that looks off balance is from one of the figures that I did for the Lost Dragons Kickstarter. To be exact, it would be the where is it? Yeah, this one. This is an off-balance pose. He's not really, because that crystal on the crystal right there is supporting that knee. But his center of gravity is ahead of where he's making contact with the base. So it has a feeling like he's moving forward. Whereas if you have him, yeah, if instead you make it look like he's got, his feet are supporting him completely, there's no movement. Even if you've got him, there might be arm movement, but it looks more static. It can still be dynamic if done properly. Like putting a nice curl back, like he's ducking back, but yet his back foot is still below his center of gravity. Movement and natural. Those are two things to remember about posing. The third is when you picture the pose and you picture how to put the hand where you want it. Two things. One, never bend a joint in a direction it cannot go. If I wanted to if I got my arm out like this on the default figure, and I wanted him to make a muscle man pose, I don't bend the arm sideways at the elbow. Instead, I rotate it and bend. And then I can twist the forearm. When I'm firing a bow, I rotate this and then rotate that back so that it's like this instead of like this, because I don't want my arm caught by the string as it pops back. Anatomy and proportion are kind of tied up together too, and with human anatomy, it's super easy to get references, and I don't mean going to Pornhub. I mean bodybuilding competitions. You can see exactly what bony landmarks, which would be like the bone right here or the collarbones, and what muscular landmarks, the pectoral, the specific layout of the different muscles, and that are. For animals, if you don't have a handy personal anatomy reference, you can find references such as the Encyclopedia Anatomicae. For monsters, well, the best thing to do is figure out what kind of proportions you want it to have. And for example, let's say a dragon. For its torso and limbs, do you want it to be more feline, like my hunting drake? More humanoid, or something that's more like a Godzilla type thing? Or more saurian, which is what I did for my wyvern. And then just simply use what anatomy references you can find. Heck, for a hunting drake, you might want to go canine instead. For a standing dragon, you might want to go more ursine, more bear-like. Right. He was here earlier. You just missed him. Isn't that true? Yeah. Alright, get on down. Now shoot. Shoot. Anyway. For me, I've got the Encyclopedia Anatomicae. Very, very useful. Very, very useful book. I mean, we're talking like this. Showing how the muscles move, what the joints are, where the various bony landmarks would be, that sort of thing. Very, very useful book. That's why it's right behind Shinju's bed all the time, because I'm constantly grabbing for it. The key on making a critter is not making something purely out of your imagination. It's making something that might exist, that has basic principles that would work. Which is partly why it's so hard to do a dragon, because a dragon is a hexapod. 6 limbs. every chordate, Carlton, every chordate from humans to cats, forelimbs. So figuring out how to arrange the bone structure and no, I gotta put you back down. Trying to figure out how to arrange the bone structure, and that is a little difficult. Same thing goes with four-armed humanoids. Do we just repeat this section with a little bit of clip up to here? That's the decision any designer has to make. A quadruped that runs would not have a bone and muscle layout like a human's arm. Instead, it would be more like a cat, a wolf, a horse, a cow, a deer, something like that. Now, a semi-quadruped that rears upright and has hands, that would be more. Nope. Ow. Hello, Ralph. You don't have hands. Cut that out. Anyway, that has hands. From here up, it might be similar to a human hand and forearm. But from here to here, it might be more like a bear. What? Anyway. So, using real-world anatomies to create fictional critters. I mean, hell, let me go ahead and once again pull up a file. From the most recent project, let's go ahead and pull up the wyvern. Okay, the storm wyvern. And here we have it. And let's cover up Ralph's face. Now, what I did, its wing arm, shoulder to elbow, I made it kind of human-like to give it the full shoulder motion it would need to put that lower wing down on the ground. The legs and hip area, I made more like that of a theropod. The neck, again, it's saurian. The head is saurian. The tail is kind of fictional, especially with the stinger at the end. But the end result, the chest I made, okay, if I was going to have arms that constantly had to be doing this all day, those pectorals would end up getting huge, and the rib cage would probably have a long keel, like a bird has. So I kind of blended human and bird anatomy on that keel area to anchor the muscles for the wings, because winging up isn't going to take a lot of force. Winging down is. Go ahead and remove that again. Crazy cat, I'm going to squish you. I'm going to scritch you. Yes. Now, is there anything you can think of that I may have touched on that you didn't quite get, or anything that I may have skipped over? Any advice that you might be looking for? just can't stay angry at them. Yeah. Say hi to Ralph. I'll be honest, I am entirely self-taught when it comes to artistic anatomy. I've had exactly one art course since elementary, and I withdrew from it. Teacher, oof. Move, Buzz, go, shoot. The teacher was a grad student, and rather than actually teach the class, the way the class was set up to be, it was supposed to be, all right, it was a Tuesday, Thursday class. 2 weeks on each tool. You know, pencils, brush, brush and ink, brush and watercolor, brush and oil, chalk, pastels, whatever. 2 weeks on each tool. The first week, day one was her demonstrating the way you held the tool, the type of stroke you did, and what kind of effect that it created, as well as giving a general idea of when you used different techniques with that tool. Day two of week one was us just doing whatever on a piece of paper with the tool, or on a canvas with the tool. Day one of week two was a still life. We painted that, or drew, or sketched, or whatever. What was that still life? And day two of week two was a live model. Now, the live models wore running shorts, and if female, wore a sports bra, but still, drawing from life. That's what it was supposed to be. 4 days, 2 weeks per tool. All she did was, except for day two, week two, when we'd have the model come in, she'd plop something on a stool and say, draw that, use that tool, and go to working on her projects. So I kind of just, if the teacher couldn't be arsed to teach, I couldn't be arsed to take the class, and I dropped it. Anyway. Any questions? Get some sody pop. Your head's about to explode as is. Well, the next question, I guess, would be, what have you tried? Have you downloaded Blender or Sculptress? Have you tried CAD, which totally different from anything organic? Have you tried even Windows 3D Builder? Just remember, I've been doing 3D for just over 20 years. I've been doing sculpting for right at about 12 years. And I've been doing sculpting miniatures for about a year and a quarter. You want to see somebody who's gone from zero to amazing in record time? Mia Bensian. She hasn't even been sculpting a full year yet, and she's doing what she does. Wow. I got Blender, haven't done anything with it. Daz. The thing about Daz, I only use that for rigging. I do not use the Daz content. Daz is designed to be a scene creation engine. You load in props. You load in a set, like a movie set. You load in a figure. Load on a clothing. Apply a pose. Get a camera angle. Set the lightings. Render. 98% of people or more, probably closer to 99.8, who use 3D Studio, who use Daz Studio, don't make their own content in any way. And most of the ones that do edit existing textures and things like that. I use it because it has it's made rigging easy. It's still not something for a brand new beginner. I mean, if you watch a couple of videos ago, I made which critter did I make? The Zodiac. I showed how I rigged it so that it would be articulated, so that as you see when I posed, it actually looks organic and stuff like that. But it also has a feature that allows me to just create a dial, just a simple on-off and percentages for completely changing the look of the mesh with a morph. And again, that's something that I've done throughout various random episodes over the past year and a quarter. I mean, when I first made it, the first thing that I did was I made elf, dwarf, halfling, gnome, and then an orc, I think, was the next one that I made. And then over the course of time, I'm now up to about 20. How many do I have? Base geo, turn-based male. Looking at the parameters for the races. Catfolk, Deep One, Dragonborn, Dry Undead, Dwarf, or let's make that Dwarf, Elf, Gnome, Goblin, Halfling, Hobgoblin, Kobold, Ogre, Orc, Orc Boss, Reptilian, Type 1, Type 2, Type 3, Turtle, Troll, the Goblin for the Green Tide, and the Orc for the Green Tide. Counting the default human, that's 22 shapes that figure can take. Now, admittedly, 2 of them are alterations to better fit my Kickstarter. Then I've got modifiers. One makes him more muscular. One makes him more hulking. One smooths out the torso. One smooths out the ears. And then I've got a couple of specific ones, like one that alters the head when it's in the goblin morph to look more like different goblin heads. Which, when I try and do them on a non-goblin figure, looks really ridiculous. And I've got one that I did specifically for personal experiments. One that drops it down in scale. So yeah, at least 20 different races on there. That in Daz, I can easily just and I can even mix and match. At least one of them, Hobgoblin, is literally just me applying partial shapes. and then memorizing it. So when I do that one dial, it's actually applying those partial shapes in the same proportions. So yeah. We have 4 people watching. One of them is me, one of them is you, Michael. It gives us 2 other people. Does anyone else have any questions about the act of sculpting, since my patron didn't show? Speak up, speak up. The whole point of the show is to teach people how to make their own figures. Yeah. Well, what do you know? Look who finally showed up. Well, you can't see her yet, because she's just... Alright. Come on, baby girl. Oh, no. She don't want to. Alright, come on. You have been missing for a while. Go. She's probably going to jump immediately jump off. Yeah. No, you can't go in there. Hold on. No. Hold on. Fuzzbutt is getting on top of my... No. No. Shoot. No. Crazy cat was starting to climb on top of the battery backup unit because she wants to sit on it and warm up. And that would be a bad thing because she could power it off. Anyway, hi Shinju. She's still... You know, no slowing down for her, that's for sure. Anyway, it's 10 after 9. I think I've pretty much covered all I can think of unless you've got another question. And I do have to get a task done. I might explain later, but all I'll say is that I do have some things that I have to do. So, I'm going to give you 1 more minute. Come up with a question. And if you don't, then we'll be saying goodnight. And I'll be doing my usual 5 to 1 and the clickety-clickety and the goofy. Okay? Yeah, right after I go off the air. Oh, wait, I forgot to ask him how to do this. Oh, no. Oh, no. Let's use this. I should note that I discovered one problem that I have with... Shinju, what are you doing? Alright, come on. Come on. Good girl. Yeah. One more problem with the paint. The inks from Watercolor. They're gorgeous, but they slide off if you try to cover it with like a lacquer or something else. Or if you try to use them for glazing. No, Fuzz, you don't want to be there. Try to use them for glazing. It's like trying to do it with enamel paints. Trying to do a wash with enamels. It rinses off the paint below it. Okay. Alright, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead, put up my hand like this, count from 5 to 1. When I get to 1, I'm going to say something goofy, pithy, insane, sane, or anything, and then go and when I see my finger go on the screen right over there, then that means that I've caught up to the lag and or delay that YouTube puts on things. So I'll be able to go ahead and log out without having, too many problems. Okay. So that's going to be a 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Sculpting a miniature is not about sculpting reality. It's about sculpting the idea of reality.